I have chapter 8, 22.
Yes.
That's what I wrote down.
Okay, so Judges 8, verse 22. Mine takes a break at after 28.
Mine does after 35.
Okay, so yours is going clear to the end then.
Mine does after 27.
Let's just read it. It's pretty short. Let's just read the whole thing. Kim, would you like to read?
Yes.
There you are.
What did we get through yesterday? Where
We're going to
eight?
pick up at 22, chapter 8, verse 22, read through the end of 8.
8:22 to the end. Okay. There's a little subtitle here. Gideon refuses to become king. Now the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Be our king. You and your sons and all your descendants shall be our rulers, for you have saved us from Midian." But Gideon replied, "I will not be your king, nor shall my son. The Lord is your king. However, I have one request. Give me all the earrings collected from your fallen foes." For the troops of Midian, being Ishmaelites, all wore gold earrings. "Gladly," they replied, and spread out a sheet for everyone to throw in the gold earrings he had gathered. Their value was estimated at $25,000, not including the crescents and pendants or the royal clothing of the kings or the chains around the camels' necks. Gideon made an ephod from the gold and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. But all Israel soon began worshiping it. So it became an evil deed that Gideon and his family did. Gideon dies. That is the true account of how Midian was subdued by Israel. Midian never recovered, and the land was at peace for 40 years, all during Gideon's lifetime. He returned home and eventually had 70 sons, for he married many wives. He also had a concubine in Shechem, who presented him with a son named Abimelech. Gideon finally died, an old man, and was buried in the sepulchre of his father Joash in Ophrah, in the land of the Abiezrites. But as soon as Gideon was dead, the Israelis began to worship the idols Baal and Baal-berith. They no longer considered the Lord as their God, though he had rescued them from all their enemies on every side. Nor did they show any kindness to the family of Gideon, despite all he had done for them.
Just, when you think you got friends, just think of Jesus and Judas and Gideon and his family.
Greed.
Absolutely. That was interesting. His concubine is the one that had Abimelech. I think Abimelech becomes pretty important.
Yeah, that name stuck out, but I don't know.
The 40 years, I thought that was interesting that again, we have peace for 40 years. Maybe we have 40 years of peace coming, who knows? And I thought it was interesting too that he refused to be king and told them the Lord would rule over them. How wise was that?
So, but God even gave them peace for 40 years, even while they were worshiping the gold. And so it sounds like it was pretty immediate that they just, oh, yay, and on we go.
I have a thing here in my Bible, Abimelech. It's about him. It said he was the first self-declared king of Israel.
Oh.
Say that again, Kathy. I was reading.
He was the first, Abimelech was the first self-declared king of Israel.
Oh.
And said he was qualified tactical planner and organizer. That was his strengths. One of his weaknesses is he had 69 of his 70 half-brothers killed.
Oh, now
69
my,
at 70. So I wonder
69 out of-
I wonder if Josiah was his half brother.
I don't know.
Because Josiah
Oh.
was hidden and became king at like 7. Dun dun dun. I guess we'll find out.
well, and I guess it kind of went over my head that Gideon made an ephod. What, I don't know really what an ephod is, but in the footnote it said after Gideon's rise to power, he seemed to have become carried away with this accumulation of wealth, and it led to the Israelites to idolatry. So
Idolatry.
I looked up
Gideon,
ephod.
Yeah.
uh-huh.
It says the term used in this passage doesn't clearly explain what exactly the object Gideon created looked like. In the law, God had directed Israel to use an ephod as part of worship. In that context, an ephod was a shirt-like garment worn by the high priest in his ceremonial duties. Exodus 28:6.
So if they began to worship it, I bet it's kind of like having Jesus up on the wall in a painting at church. You know, you start worshiping that idol instead of. All right, Cindy, whenever you're ready.
8:22:23. Rule over us. Israelites sinned by the misguided motive that reign as king. His decline, insisting that God alone rule. 8:24 Ishmaelites, synonymous with Midianites. Now, I don't have Ishmaelites in my verse 24. Does
I
anyone-
do. So they had golden earrings, and because they were Ishmaelites, so that must have been Ishmaelites would have come from Ishmael, which would have been Abraham's son, right? Was it Isaac and Ishmael?
Oh,
So they would have been the opposite of the Israelites.
The bad seed.
Yeah, the bad seed.
8:24-27. Gideon made an ephod. This was certainly a sad end to Gideon's influence, as he, perhaps, in an expression of pride, sought to lift himself up in the eyes of the people. Gideon intended nothing more than to make a breastplate, as David later did in 1 Chronicles 15:27, to indicate civil rule, not priestly rule. It was never intended to set up idolatrous worship, but to be a symbol of civil power. That no evil was intended can be noted from the subduing of Midian, quietness from wars, the fact that idolatry came only after Gideon's death, as well as the commendation of Gideon. 8:26, the weight of the gold. The total was about 42 pounds. 8:30:31. Gideon fell into the sin of polygamy, an iniquity tolerated by many, but which never was God's blueprint for marriage. Abimelech, a son by yet another illicit relationship, grew up to be the wretched king in Judges 9. Polygamy always resulted in trouble. That's it.
So Ishmael was the first son between Abraham and Hagar. Ishmael and Midian were either brothers or half brothers. And they are present day Arabs.
Oh.
Kathy, whenever you're ready.
Okay. A puzzling reply for his friends. The narrative focuses on two requests, one from the people to Gideon and the other from Gideon to the people. The people request a king. This is verses 22, 23, and 29 to 32. So popular was Gideon that the people asked him to set up a dynasty, something altogether new for the nation of Israel. This was one way they could reward Gideon for what he had done for them, but it was also somewhat of a guarantee that there would be a measure of unity among the tribes as well as the kind of leadership that would mobilize them against possible future invaders. Their request was a confession of unbelief, for as Gideon reminded them, God was their king. Gideon rejected their generous offer purely on theological grounds. He would not take the place of Jehovah God. Every Jew should have known that the mercy seat in the tabernacle was the throne of God from which he ruled in the midst of his people. You who sit enthroned between the cherubim shine forth. Psalm 81. The Lord reigns, let the nations tremble. He sits enthroned between the cherubim, let the earth shake. And I'm assuming that's Psalm 99:1. To set up a rival throne would be to dethrone the Lord. Moses warned that Israel would one day want a king like other nations and forget that they were a unique nation, unlike the Gentiles. And there are references to Deuteronomy and Exodus. What other nation had the Creator, the Lord of heaven and earth, as their king? What Gideon said was commendable, but what he did later was very puzzling. After rejecting the throne, he lived like a king. Judges 8:29 to 32 describes the lifestyle of a monarch, not that of a judge or a retired army officer. Gideon was quite wealthy, partly from the spoils of battle and partly from the gifts of the people, and he had many wives and at least one concubine. His wives bore him 70 sons. His concubine bore him one.
Did they give any
In fact-
references for that? Or I guess this would be the reference down here in 29 or 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. It says it right there in 30. Sorry, go ahead.
His wives bore him 70 sons. His concubine bore him one. In fact, he named the son of the concubine Abimelech, which means my father is a king. And this son later tried to live up to his name and become ruler over all the land. Gideon also seems to have assumed priestly duties, for he made his own ephod and probably consulted it on behalf of the people. Nobody would deny that this courageous soldier judge deserved honor and rewards, but his retirement plan seemed a bit extravagant. Gideon requests gold, verses 24 to 28. The people were only too eager to share their spoils with Gideon. After all, he had brought peace to the land, and he refused to become their king. Therefore, it was only right that he receive something for his labors. The Midianites wore gold crescents either on the ear or the nose, and the Israelite soldiers would have quickly taken these valuable items as they gathered the spoils. Gideon ended up with over 40 pounds of gold, plus the wealth he took from Zebah and Zalmunna. No wonder he was able to live like a king. At this point, the man of faith led the people into idolatry, for Gideon made an ephod, and the people played the harlot with it. Verse 27. This meant that they stopped giving their true devotion to the Lord and used the ephod for an idol. In Scripture, idolatry is looked upon as prostitution, and there are references to Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, James. Gideon may have made the ephod as a representation of Jehovah to help the people in their worship, but a good motive can never compensate for a bad action. He knew it was wrong to make an idol. Whether this ephod was an embellished version of the garment used by the high priest or some kind of standing idol, we can't tell, but it was used in worship and became a snare to Gideon and the people. Perhaps Gideon used it to determine the will of God and help the people with their problems. If the ephod was indeed a copy of a high priest's garment, then Gideon was definitely out of God's will in duplicating it and using it, because Gideon wasn't a priest. If it was a standing idol, Gideon was disobeying God's law and corrupting people as well. It was just a short step from worshiping the ephod to worshiping Baal. Gideon missed a great opportunity to bring reformation and perhaps revival to the land. He had torn down his father's idols, but there were many households in Israel that were still devoted to Baal, and those idols needed to be destroyed as well. The great victory over Midian gave Gideon good reason to call the nation back to the Lord in obedience to his law. But instead of using the occasion for God's glory, he used it for his own profit, and the nation eventually lapsed into sin once again. With his vast wealth and his great national reputation, Gideon probably thought that his children were well provided for, but just the opposite proved true. 69 of his 70 sons were killed by their half-brother, who himself was slain by a woman dropping a stone on his head. There is no security apart from the will of God. Had Gideon practiced Matthew 6:33, subsequent events might have been radically different. What caused Gideon's decline? I think it was pride. Before the battle against Midian, Gideon humbly depended on the Lord. During the mopping up operations, however, he became authoritative and even vindictive. When he refused the kingship, he sounded pious. The Lord shall rule over you. But I have a suspicion that he had a hidden agenda in his heart. You don't find Gideon honoring the Lord or calling the people together to make a new covenant to obey the Lord. Gideon started out as a servant, but now he was an important celebrity. The result was a decline for him, his family, and his nation. It's interesting and instructive to contrast Abraham and Gideon in the decisions they made after their respective stories. Abraham took nothing for himself, but made sure that others received their share of the spoils. He especially refused to take anything from the heathen king of Sodom. Instead, Abraham fellowshiped with Melchizedek, king of Salem, a type of our Lord Jesus Christ. And in that he said and did. And in all that he said and did, Abraham gave glory to the Lord of heaven and earth. Andrew Bonar was right. Let us be as watchful after the victory as before the battle. After all, there may still be some landmines scattered around.
I find that interesting what he said about he did not gather the people to basically reaffirm or affirm their commitment to the Lord. And I think I was just thinking in the church, we don't do that as a body either. I kind of think that might be an important thing to do. Like people can say amen, yes, I agree, or keep their mouth shut. You know what I mean? But like to be taught the importance of that commitment.
I thought it was interesting that he named his son Abimelech.
My dad is king.
Yeah, and he said, I don't want to be your king. So what happened there?
His concubine, nonetheless.
Yes.
Not his, how many wives? It just said he has many wives, 70 sons.
And Abimelech killed 69 of them. So number 70, like you said, Chrissy, was probably Joash.
Josiah.
Josiah, who was hidden as a child.
Yes. I don't know because he became king. Right now we're in the line of kings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was the only good king too, or one of two good kings, something like that.
Jotham is the only surviving brother.
Oh. Then
There's a whole write-up in my Bible about Abimelech. So I've read ahead a little bit, but you know who I thought about when I was reading about him was what? No, I'll save that for when we're not recording.
Okay. Make note because I'll forget. Okay, any other thoughts? I'm going to read Tony. And if someone has any other thoughts, go ahead and shall I go ahead? 22 and 23. In response to Gideon's victory, the Israelites said, rule over us, you as well as your sons and your grandsons, for you delivered us from the power of Midian. See all that gratefulness and appreciation that was happening there that quickly fades after 40 years? Gideon was already the deliverer God provided, but the Israelites wanted more. They wanted a king, but God didn't intend them to be like other nations. He did not want them to have a monarchy until they learned to live under him. God will rule over you. When men do not know how to be ruled properly under God, they are willing to be ruled improperly by man because man will seek to become God. Wow, that's powerful. Does that sound like a good post? 24 through 27. Gideon rejected their request to be their king, and that's good. Yet he asked each of them to give him an earring of gold. With these, he made an ephod, and it became a spiritual trap for Israel, for Gideon, and for his family. An ephod was a priestly article that fit like a vest. There was only one official ephod. Oh, I guess that's true because there would only be one high priest at a time. That's a good point. There's only one official ephod. It was to be used only by a Levitical priest in the tabernacle. Thus, Gideon chose to make something that he shouldn't have to use in a place where such a thing didn't belong. And in doing so, he assumed an illegitimate position of religious authority that had not been assigned to him. And as the Israelites looked to him and his ephod to be a spiritual guide, they were unfaithful to God's program. 28 through 31. Israel had peace for 40 years, but unfortunately Gideon had 70 sons since he had many wives. Things didn't go smoothly under Gideon's leadership as they might have. Whenever you see polygamy in the Bible, you've got a messy situation that contrasts with God's stated his design for marriage, which you can find in Genesis 2:23 and 24. As if Gideon's many wives aren't alarming enough, he also had a concubine, that's a mistress, and he named their son Abimelech, which means, get ready for this, my father is king. It seems that the power Gideon got from acting like a priest had gone to his head, and he was setting the stage for a dynasty. That's just the kind of overreach that can happen when someone is given unlimited power without accountability. Every leader needs limits and advisors to hold him in check. 32 through 35. Eventually, Gideon died, and immediately the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves by worshiping false gods. Not only did the Israelites fail to remember that ultimately it was God who had delivered them from their enemies, but they didn't even respect Gideon's family for all he had done for them. As a result, they started worshiping Baal Berith, or Baal of the Covenant. I think too, like his kids, if he was beginning to act entitled, I imagine his kids were too. They probably lost respect because people would have been like, well, you didn't do it, your dad did. But they probably walked, I mean, I'm just guessing, like what would probably be natural would be that they would get a little arrogant. In other words, they were practicing religious syncretism. They were mixing faiths. They were worshiping Baal and mixing it with God's covenant with them. This is much like what happened when a previous generation made a golden calf idol and called it the one who brought Israel up from Egypt. See Exodus 32, 4 and 5. Such compromises can only lead to death. Any thoughts?
I like this footnote for 831. Said the relationship between Gideon and a concubine produced a son who tore apart Gideon's family and caused tragedy for the nation. Gideon illustrates the fact that heroes in battle are not always heroic in day-to-day living. Gideon led the nation but could not lead his family. No matter who you are, moral laxness will cause problems. Just because you have won a single battle with temptation does not mean you will automatically overcome the next. We need to be constantly watchful against temptation.
What did you say about he was born? the son born to the concubine did what? Tore apart.
Tore apart Gideon's family and caused tragedy for the nation.
Tore apart
Gideon's family.
Gideon's family.
And caused tragedy for the nation.
And I put the son born in polygamy tore apart Gideon's family and caused tragedy for the nation.
Yeah, but they were all born in polygamy. It was just Abimelech. Yeah, it was just Abimelech that was born of the concubine.
Yeah. Well, what's the difference between the concubine and a wife? Because if you have 15 wives, you're not legally married. You know what I mean? Like, I would think the concubine would just be another one, unless she
I'm
was like
thinking,
a slave for sexual purposes.
I'm thinking back then they were allowed to have multiple wives.
I know, but why would the concubine be separated out as a concubine? Because why would
But
she have one of the wives?
my question was, why would he even need a concubine?
Right?
But he did, because that's who he was. He was ruthless.
Mhm.
He was
Well, and then I'm thinking too, Gideon, if he was the only son, well, it doesn't say he was the only son, does it? Just bore him a son. Just, it doesn't say he was the only one, but my thought was too, like if his wife was concubine, would they have then called him a bastard? Like, would the other 70 brothers have been like, oh, you're not at the same level as us because your mom isn't married to our dad. You were born out of the wedlock. Like,
perhaps.
he would get
I don't-
that frustrated.
I was reading ahead about Abimelech, and it doesn't really talk about the other brothers. It just talks about how ruthless and how just the greed for power that Abimelech had. Like, power overtook him. He didn't have power, power had him. And so he was totally blinded by that. So even, I don't know how the other brothers treated him, but he killed them all. He killed them
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Ordered them all killed.
Yeah, so going back to Ishmael, he was the son between Abraham and Hagar. Midian was the son between Abraham and Keturah, which would have been Abraham's second wife after Sarah died. So Ishmael would have been like, yeah, he would have been a little bit older, but very, very interesting. And I think it's interesting too that the Gideon made an ephod. He wasn't even from the Levites. Like,
What did you say about Sarah? That was whose?
so
Wife?
Abraham and Sarah were the original, right? But Abraham had a child to Hagar, which was the handmaiden, that's Ishmael. But then after Sarah died, he married Keturah. That was his second wife. Midian is a child between them.
Okay, I was just reading something here about Abimelech, and it says Abimelech would have taken Sarah, Abraham's wife, into his harem, but learning that she was the wife of another, returned her uninjured. And that was throwing me. I was like, wait a minute, why did he?
Yeah. That would have been his stepmother.
Yeah,
And I don't think he married Keturah until after Sarah died. So there's a missing piece here.
What was the Midian's mother?
Midian's mother was Keturah.
Keturah.
Yeah, Keturah.
I find it interesting that, okay, Gideon is one of those that are in the Hall of Faith chapter, right?
Oh,
Isn't it he on there?
Gideon?
Yeah,
That'd be what, Hebrews chapter 12.
at least I thought we read that. Maybe
I
I'm
think-
wrong.
let's look, because I know Barack was, and we were shocked about that because of Diana having to go with the poor guy into war because he couldn't do it himself, which then allowed JL to get credit.
Yeah, Gideon's mentioned in Hebrews.
Oh,
See, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Okay, he's mentioned in that, but yet then his ending was not very good. But he's still mentioned in Hebrews. I guess because of the simple fact that he did finally, in the beginning, go out in faith to follow.
you see what
What the
happens
Lord
though? Like
said.
Solomon started out good, got spoiled, went bad. Gideon started out good, got spoiled, went bad. I mean,
I don't know which one of you read this, but I wrote it down and highlighted it. Unlimited power without accountability was Gideon's demise. And that's the same, like you're just saying, for all those other people, Solomon and
that's why you need a wise council of that's why you need a wise
Woman.
council of elders.
you say a woman, Kathy.
You need a woman. I was talking to someone that attends I'm not gonna say where the church is, but it's run by a woman. And I said, well, do you guys have elders or like, no, not really. I said, so she just kind of makes all the decisions and there's no input from other leadership. No, I said, I don't think that's healthy. Because you need people that are going to say no to you when you're wrong.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when people get wealthy too. Look at all these people that are coming down right now. They had unlimited power and nobody would say no to them. Okay, so now we are moving on to chapter 9.
Well, I have a footnote on
ahead.
Judges 8:34 to 35. The power of remembering. Judges is a great but negative example of why, quotes, remembering God is so important. Throughout Israel's history, God's people seem to forget over and over and over. What about us? Are there things that God has done for us that we need to be remembering?
I think that that's interesting too, like with the Israelites, like God was like, talk to them, while you're walking, talk to them while you're, eating, teach them. And it's like how quickly they forgot in the desert. I'm like, when God does like these miracles for you, like, I mean, I'm not in that situation, so I guess I probably don't really have the right to an opinion, but it's like, how do you forget the wonderful things he's done so quickly?
And
But
when
for
they
the
were in the
Israelites,
desert,
that was their history. All
Over
through.
and over, over and
Yeah.
over.
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
it wasn't just one time. It was just they'd get through it and back right into it, you know.
Kathy.
But isn't it Revelation that says that like though in the end times it'll be like the days of Noah, and it sounds like it here too. Oh, everything is going good, so let's party, let's have a good time, let's enjoy the wealth, and then suddenly we're caught up in this life of adultery, and we have to get like totally humbled to come on our knees again before the Lord. And then he starts to bless you again, and then it's like, oh yeah, let's party, and and they totally forget about him and start idolizing I think we do it now with our houses, our boats, our cars, all the things material wise. Oh yes, Lord, I'll show up for that hour on Sunday though and give you some honor. That's my input.
And I heard a long time ago, I can't remember who said this. It was a preacher. But the more things you get, the more it takes away from your time, your supposed time with God, because either maintenance of that thing, or because I remember specifically this guy saying about they had bought a swing set for their kids. And he put it together, and then he said he got to read the instructions. Oil weekly, do this weekly. And he said it just brought him into light that every time you get something, even if it's just maintenance on something, that's one more thing that's taking your time away from what should be maybe be God's time or family time, or
Well,
all
even-
those little toys we get or whatever.
I think that this is even Paul that said that, like, you're better not married, not because he doesn't want you to get married, but because your time is so divided. Your heart is divided. You know, you can't be single focused on God because you're going to be divided, even taking care of your spouse or family or whatever. Not that you shouldn't get married, but he's saying, like, to serve the Lord, you're better to be single because then you can be devoted wholly.
Well, even if you look at what we do with kids today, a lot of times they're not spending time with families. It's in organized sports, organized games, and that takes up a ton of time away from your family, away from your home. And, you know, I really don't think today there's that much family time, true family time really going on.
Yeah, they're not even eating meals together. And I, you know, just in raising my kids, not that I was the perfect mom, but one of the things we had was a mealtime, and their friends would be here. And I knew what was going on in everybody's life because during mealtime, you talked. But our kids aren't even getting that, or they're eating out and the parents are on their phone. We're
I
gonna
can
go ahead.
I can testify to that. You know, you pour your life, but you do what you think is right at the time, and you just gotta, accept that and move forward and just
Yeah.
pray that the situation comes about again, that, you have right to make it right.
Yeah.
'Cause there was a observation in the one study thing I have is sin will always be judged by God. Consequences from our past sins often come back to haunt us, but sins bring judgment. Turn away from the sin that you enjoy. Seek help to remove the sin that recurs in your life. Don't let the patterns of sinfulness destroy your life. Repent and seek Christ's help. And we all, we're all in sin nature. That it says that here in this study life lesson that I have about with Adam, but we just gotta seek him through it all at every point.
I think that the thing too, like, I guess I think in our wisdom, us all being a little bit older and our kids older, is like, what can we help maybe younger mamas who might watch this, or in life in general, like if we could go back and say a redo, you know, what wisdom can we give to them so they don't make the same mistakes that we did? I think that's important. And I
Yeah.
wish now, like, nothing in my mind now, nothing is more important now to me than what I'm doing for the kingdom. So, because I guess I realized with age, in Ecclesiastes, with age, you start to recognize that everything else is worthless except for what you're doing for the kingdom.
Yeah.
I remember way back when Brett was in school yet, and he really wanted to play football. And I couldn't allow him to do it because with working, I didn't have time to run him to practice all the time. But I think it's become worse, even with sports and stuff, because now not only do they have practice almost every night, it seems like, from what I hear from younger mothers and kids who are involved, or if they have multiple kids, every night the kids are in something, but then they play on Sundays. So that takes one more day.
And Wednesday nights.
Right. So at the time I kind of felt bad that I couldn't allow him to do that. But then as I'm older now, I'm thinking, well, maybe that was just a good thing. There was just that much more running, that at the time with my previous marriage would not have, it would just been that much more worse, So as much as he maybe wanted to do that, it just didn't work. And I don't know that was a bad thing.
Yeah, and when you think about it, what is that really about? It's about beating someone else and primarily
Me.
winning. That's all
Me.
it is.
I am the star.
And at
Yeah.
one point it used to be sports were like, it was to teach kids to work together, a team thing,
Right.
but it wasn't all about just winning. You had to learn to lose too. And so it wasn't just the whole, I'm just gonna be out there to whoop everybody and
Well, and I think that there's a balance again, like moderation. Like if your child plays soccer, like they play one sport a year and you're teaching them that Sundays is dedicated to the Lord. So yeah, we're playing, but the coach fully knows we're not going to be there for games on Sunday because we honor the Lord for, you know what I mean? But I also know like some people have their kids in four sports and they never eat dinner together and they're just rushing from here to there. They're not getting any family time. And it's, you know, it's like it's not in moderation. Like I don't think that sports like all in all is bad, but like your child's not going into eternity with their medals or lack of medals. Like how many kids actually go on to play a professional sport? And even then, I think that can be worse for them because then it's all about the money and
Mhm.
performance and what everybody else thinks that you should be doing. So it can be very destructive if there's no balance. And then I think like, you know, I think families that are homeschooled, like they get a lot of time together. Well, if they go play soccer, you know, once season out of the year, that's not going to be unhealthy for them because they're spending time together. But if you're not spending any time, you're running. And with these poor kids, they're in school all day. They're in school all day sitting at a desk and then they're running all evening and then they go home and they have homework. Like no wonder they have this mental illness issue going on. There's no time to think. We're teaching them to be busy. There's no time for them to rest, to sit in quiet, to be creative.
There are some mothers that have their kids in one sport. When it ends, they put them in another one, and it's a continuation on. So they have, I don't see whether there's anything good in a family that does that.
And you think about it a lot of times, well, Joey's doing it and Susie's doing it and so's. Well, then you're just learning how to like worry about what other people think of you, you know, like what they think and or that peer pressure. And I think they need to be taught to be tough and be their own thinkers.
Well, there's no such thing as just play. You know, when we were growing up, we made up games. We didn't have these organizations that we played for. We were very creative. And what I found when I was teaching elementary, these kids were not, they honestly were crippled by
Yeah.
creativity. They
Yeah.
could not do, they really could not do it. They
Yeah.
were so in this organized, doing
Somebody
this and
else was
going,
thinking for them.
exactly.
I noticed that too, Cindy, when I homeschooled for 2 years. And I remember the first year, it was just my son and my daughter. And I would ask them a question, a simple question, and they would sit there and stare at me. And I was like, why are they just staring at me? And I'm like, guys, like, what do you think? They did not know how to think. And what I figured out was you have that 10% of the class that's really quick processors and really quick thinkers. I mean, their hands go up right away. And so they always get called on. The other kids don't have to think. So they learn to sit there and just let them do all the thinking for them. And I was like, that was like one of the most impactful lessons that I learned homeschooling them is like the damage that we're doing to their thinking process. And listen, they test them. They teach them something within 2 weeks, they're being tested. If you're not a quick processor, you're a failure in school. Anyway, whole nother rabbit hole. I'm sure Cindy and I could have hours of discussion on that. I wish they would take schooling to benchmarking, not grades, benchmarks. You just work through your benchmarks before you go on to another benchmark. But anywho, well, it's almost 9, so I think we will end our reading of God's word for today on that note, and we will pick up at chapter 9 tomorrow at regular time. Any last thoughts before we get off here?
Stop recording.
Okay. Oh, that's right.